He had saved 17,000 jobs that month. The financial district had crowned him a modern Hercules, the man who understood consequence better than anyone else. But the quietest failure of his life occurred exactly 48 hours after the champagne cork stopped popping, when the phone line went flat. He knew the cost of everything, except the price of saying yes. Julian Vance lived in a state of controlled elevation. His penthouse apartment was a silent architectural statement 70 floors above Manhattan, mirroring his existence, separate, high above the unpredictable ground. He did not navigate the world, he managed systems. At 46, he had perfected the art of strategic subtraction, cutting away inefficiency, emotion, and sentimentality until only pure, profitable structure remained. This precision had made him a billionaire. It had also made him the last cold hope for the dying Aegis Group. Aegis was not merely a corporation, it was a microcosm of American instability, loaded with legacy debt and sentimental value. Julian had been called in to perform the miracle triage. The numbers were catastrophic. The human element, the thousands of pensions, the fragile communities dependent on the plants, was irrelevant to his calculations, but essential to the optics. For 3 months, he slept 4 hours a night, reducing variables, liquidating assets, and restructuring balance sheets with surgical indifference. He saved Aegis, not through empathy, but through mathematical necessity. The market rallied immediately. The narrative was perfect, the cold, calculating hero who put logic ahead of panic. His life with Ilara existed in a parallel universe that Julian kept ruthlessly compartmentalized. She was an oil painter, living 4 miles south in a sun-drenched, slightly chaotic loft studio, a stark contrast to Julian's sterile glass box. Ilara saw complexity and texture where Julian saw only data points. She was his deliberate breach of control, the one place where he allowed vulnerability to exist, safely contained. The diagnosis arrived in late September, a rare, aggressive form of cancer requiring immediate, specialized treatment overseas. The cost was firm, $150,000. For Julian, this was less than the annual maintenance fee for his private jet hangar. It was a sum so trivial it barely registered on his monthly ledger. Ilara did not ask him immediately. She tried to sell her last 10 paintings, calling galleries, negotiating loans. She hated the idea of asking for salvation, but the timeline compressed. She finally called him on a Tuesday evening, just as Julian was reviewing the final Aegis restructuring agreements, the papers that confirmed his $50 million bonus.
Julian, her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual vibrant cadence. It's time. I can't get the rest. I need to leave next.
Julian paused, holding the pen above the signature line. The silence in his office was immense, broken only by the low hum of the city's electric pulse. He processed the request not as a plea for life, but as a strategic transaction.
"You know my position on dependency, Ilara," he said, his voice flat, retaining the calibrated restraint he used in hostile negotiations. "I help people who help themselves. I respect your independence. That is why I am with."
She absorbed the statement. It was a test, a perverse application of his corporate philosophy to their relationship. He expected her to push back, to argue for the exception, the human curve. He wanted to see if she would break her own code of self-sufficiency.
"This isn't about independence, Julian. This is about time," she whispered.
Time is the ultimate scarce resource, he agreed, and the price must be earned. The moment I become your source, I become your controller. I won't do that to you. Or to... He waited for the argument. He waited for the surrender. He waited for the emotional blackmail that would justify his eventual dramatic rescue. But Ilara did not comply with his script. She merely said, "I see. I needed to know the price of independence. Thank you." She hung up. The click echoed louder than any explosion in Julian's meticulously silent office. He sat there, staring at the phone, feeling a strange, cold satisfaction. He had upheld the principle. He had maintained the boundaries. The request had been handled, contained, and dismissed according to his established logic. The next 72 hours were a blur of public triumph. The Aegis deal closed. Julian was on the front cover of every major financial publication, hailed as the man who understood the hard truth that emotion had no place in decision-making. The gala was blinding, a cathedral of praise and power. Julian stood amidst the applause, perfectly composed, accepting the accolades for his ruthless efficiency. He felt the weight of perception settle upon him, the man who never flinched.
Alara died 4 days later in a small municipal hospital, waiting for a surgery slot that required a down payment she could not raise. It was not a grand, traumatic end, but a quiet attrition. She slipped away while Julian was accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award at a black tie event. When the call came, Julian was mid-sentence, discussing interest rate derivatives with a central bank governor. He took the call in a side hallway, the background noise of celebration muffled by the heavy velvet curtain.
Miss Reed passed away at 3:17 a.m. We did everything we...
Julian did not react physically. No gasp, no tremor. He simply straightened his tie. The only visible sign of disturbance was the microscopic twitch in his left eyelid. He thanked the doctor, hung up, and walked back into the ballroom. He smiled, shook hands, and finished the conversation about the derivatives. He felt nothing but a vast, terrifying emptiness where his calculated satisfaction should have been. He had saved 17,000 strangers. He had refused to save one woman. The cost of that refusal was not a financial liability. It was the total dismantling of his internal rationale. He did not attend the funeral. He sent flowers, white lilies, excessively arranged, and a discreet, untraceable check to cover all outstanding medical and final expenses, a sum 3 times what she had requested. It was an attempt to buy back the choice he had made, an empty gesture of solvency against an absolute deficit. The true weight of the consequence hit him 2 weeks later. He returned to her loft. The air still smelled faintly of turpentine and Alara's specific, unique scent of cinnamon and paint thinner. Her canvases were draped everywhere, half-finished landscapes capturing light he would never see again. On her small, cluttered desk, he found a folded note and a spare key to her apartment, attached to a simple brass ring. The note was short. I needed you to see the difference between leverage and grace, Julian. You saw leverage. I forgive you that. He held the key. It was cold and heavy. It was a physical remnant of a door he had locked with his own ideological framework. He had applied the laws of finance to human existence, and in doing so, he had become solvent in the bank, but bankrupt in his own life. The world saw Julian Vance as the epitome of success, the man who controlled the uncontrollable. He became the subject of business school case studies. Vance's axiom, never confuse sympathy with. He was untouchable, yet internally he was decomposing, slowly, silently, under the crushing weight of public perception. His system of control was shattered. He had built his life on the premise that if you managed the risk, you managed the outcome. Alara's death proved the existence of variables that lay outside the balance sheet, variables that killed not with debt, but with neglect. The transformation was gradual, clinical, and entirely private. Julian created the Alara Reed Foundation, a philanthropic entity unlike any other. It was designed solely to fund emergency, life-threatening surgeries that fell outside standard insurance coverage. The mandate was strict: no media involvement, no naming rights, absolute operational efficiency. The foundation became a logistical machine, moving millions of dollars quickly and quietly, bridging the gap between diagnosis and treatment for those facing the clock. It was atonement measured in thousands of successful outcomes. He saved people who had exhausted their options, people who needed exactly the $150,000 equivalent he had denied Alara. He saved them with the same cold, systemic efficiency he used to restructure Aegis. But there was one absolute,
irrevocable rule governing his philanthropic empire. Julian Vance would never enter a hospital. He could manage the spreadsheets of recovery rates, analyze the efficacy of surgeons, and approve the seven-figure equipment purchases. But he could not stand near the bright fluorescent light, the faint metallic scent of antiseptic, or the chilling sound of monitors maintaining a life on the edge. Hospitals were the physical embodiment of the vulnerability he had rejected. They were the places where control evaporated, where even billions could not buy immunity from biology. He received yearly reports detailing the thousands of lives saved by the foundation. These reports arrived in stark, minimalist binders, focusing on statistics, procedures funded, recovery percentages, average cost per patient. Julian would read them in his silent penthouse, drinking a single glass of scotch, seeking a number, a statistic that could quantify the redemption he craved. But the numbers offered only scale, not peace. Years passed. Julian's public image softened slightly, the ruthless financier narrative tempered by the knowledge of his massive, quiet philanthropy. He was seen as a complicated figure, perhaps misunderstood, a man whose heart was finally catching up to his intellect. He attended fundraisers, sitting at the high-stakes tables, the center of attention. People often thanked him, praising the foundation's quick action. They spoke of miracle outcomes. Once, a young woman approached him, tears welling in her eyes, explaining that the foundation had paid for her daughter's pediatric heart transplant. She reached out to touch his arm, expressing eternal gratitude. Julian smiled politely, his eyes distant, incapable of processing the warmth. He felt the same psychological detachment he had felt signing the Aegis liquidation papers. He was operating in the third person, an engine of consequence, incapable of genuine connection to the outcome. He remained the master of distance. He saved lives he refused to see, funded hope he refused to feel. He was trapped in a perpetual loop of compensation, the universe demanding repayment in full, not for the money, but for the principle he had valued over a heartbeat. He was the hero of the balance sheet, perpetually haunted by the one line item he had chosen to zero out. Julian Vance had proven that a man could save the world, or at least a significant portion of the global economy, only to discover that the truest measure of a life is what you chose to save when the cost was minimal, and the relationship was everything. He had saved himself the trouble of becoming dependent, but in doing so, he had guaranteed his own eternal, elevated isolation. He still kept the brass key. It sat in a small, lacquered box on his bedside table. Every morning, before the city woke up, he would pick it up, feel its cold weight, and remember the silent conversation in which he proved his own fatal, calculating error. The key was useless now. The door it opened was closed forever. It was a tangible reminder that power is only useful when you choose to wield it with grace, and that sometimes the most expensive asset you possess is the simple capacity to be human. He continued his work, the foundation growing year after year, saving hundreds, then thousands more. Julian Vance was a machine of relentless, calculated goodness, ensuring that no one else would perish due to the administrative failures of compassion. He knew he would never find peace. He knew this was not a penance with an end date, but a life sentence of perpetual, detached salvation. The irony, sharp and cutting, was that Julian Vance was financially free, yet utterly imprisoned by the consequences of a decision that had cost him nothing but himself. He had saved the company, but lost the blueprint for his own soul. Next time, we look into the hidden costs of inherited success. What happens when a multi-billion-dollar empire built on cold calculation falls into the hands of the one person Julian Vance protected from all consequences, his estranged son? The world believes the son is weak. Julian knows the son is just starting the clock on his own devastating inheritance. Subscribe to ensure you don't miss how the silence of the father becomes the loud reckoning of the next generation.